Starfield was an extremely important game for Bethesda. From Morrowind to Fallout 4, Bethesda were riding a high. Morrowind was one of the first expansive open world RPGs on home consoles, and Oblivion was vital in forming my gaming taste back on the PS3. It was the first of its kind for me, and I'll never forget the first time I exited the sewers and saw the open landscape of Cyrodiil. It was magical. Even though I was 8 and didn't really know what I was doing, I understood how special it was back then. I had the exact same but slightly more in tune experience with Fallout 3. Leaving Vault 101 is something that I will always remember, and even though I had a bit more of a clue, I was too scared to play it because I remember going to a school where the ghouls were and I crapped myself. I rectified my shortcomings with both of the games when I got a bit older, but one game that was groundbreaking back in the day and also proved to be one of the most influential games ever made was Skyrim. And I got it for Christmas in 2011 and I fell in love. At the ripe old age of 13, I actually knew what I was doing, and I fell even more in love with Bethesda's worlds and approach to exploration. Cyrodiil, Skyrim, the Capital Wasteland, and later the Commonwealth in Fallout 4 felt like worlds. They were connected, and I could walk from one side to the next, giving them a real sense of place. And after hundreds of hours across multiple platforms in all of these games, I can almost map out the major locations and what route you want to take to get to them. But with these fantastic games came shortcomings. They all had their issues, but they were most prominent in Fallout 4, which I believe was a step back from the bar set in Skyrim. They leaned more into the building aspect, with settlements playing a massive part, and they stripped away the RPG elements which I loved in the previous games. Skyrim was groundbreaking in the open world and RPG space, and for me it felt like Fallout 4 was a regression. Or maybe if not a regression, just an iteration. Nothing exactly new in the way of exploration and world building. Instead, the focus on building felt misguided to me, and I would have much preferred the resources go into a deeper narrative, more choice and consequence, and more unique locations to explore. Bethesda were in a tricky spot a few years after Fallout 4. They had released Fallout 76, and I could do a whole video on that, so I won't bore you here. We know what happened there at launch, and on a side note, I think Fallout 76 is actually quite decent nowadays. As a publisher, they'd also released stinkers like Wolfenstein The Youngblood and Redfall, which, again, I don't need to say much about them, they just weren't great. A lot was riding on Starfield because it was Bethesda's next big thing, a new IP, a full-fledged single-player RPG, and with Fallout 5 and The Elder Scrolls 6 seemingly years away even now, it was all us Bethesda fans had to look forward to. And let's not forget the importance of the Xbox brand since they had some pretty bad releases themselves. And all this added up to what I think was unrealistic expectations for Starfield. Not only were we relying on it to deliver us that true Bethesda experience, it also got wrapped up in the typical console war crap that we all hate. I bought the early edition of Starfield, so I coughed up a lot of money to play the game, and my first impressions weren't great. It starts off super slow with loads of tutorials, but once I got through and landed on Cydonia, I thought, wow, they had made an amazing city here, filled with deep lore and loads of quests, and then I met the companions at the lodge, and I started to love the game. They improved the gameplay, making things feel smoother and having better gunplay than Fallout 4, and I mean, there are an infinite amount of better shooters, but it was still decent at Starfield. I enjoyed visiting the main towns, and I really soaked in the atmosphere in each one because they did a brilliant job of making them completely unique from one another. But as things went on, it became an exercise in fast travelling. Every 5 minutes I was travelling to one place, talking to an NPC, then fast travelling back to another, killing a few enemies, then fast travelling back to the first NPC. It got tedious, boring, and it meant that my favourite part of Bethesda games was missing. The game just did not fill me with that sense of exploration that the other games have. I put roughly 25 hours into it in 2023, and then I gave up. There just wasn't enough of what I wanted in a Bethesda game to keep me coming back for more. The year it was released also didn't do it any justice. I was reviewing too many games, swamped with codes. I couldn't beat the games I wanted to because I had to quickly move on to the next one. So this is the series of reviews where I like to go back and fix my own shortcomings, but also approach the games from a different angle. Firstly, I'm giving myself enough time to do what I want in the game, no arbitrary clock or release date on the horizon to beat the game by. And then since this is my second attempt, I know what angle I need to take to best enjoy the experience. I feel Starfield is good for two kinds of players. The first is someone who enjoys the building aspect. Building settlements that harvest resources, building ships that help in fighting other ships and exploring space, and just generally that sort of survival-y side of it. The other, surprisingly, isn't typical Bethesda fans. In fact, I would say Starfield caters towards fans of old BioWare games more than Bethesda fans, with a rather deep narrative, plenty of choice and consequence, and an emphasis on interesting side quests and companions, and also leading more into the fast travel side of things. I fit into the BioWare side of this equation, so that's the angle I attack this at. I tried my hardest to leave the disappointment of world exploration behind, and I treated it like a BioWare style RPG. And even though I tried my best to get the most out of Starfield, I can unequivocally say that Starfield is a mess. Some parts are extremely strong and the best Bethesda have ever created, but the rest is filled with design choices that I am baffled by. I want to start with two things that Starfield does so well, and I mean extremely well. Bethesda are known for mediocre main quest lines. When I think of Oblivion, all I remember is the boring Oblivion gates. When I think of Fallout 3, I think of a quest line that ended before it even began. When I think of Skyrim, all I remember is climb the high Hrothgar, and that's it. From my memory, there are no interesting main quests within the full quest lines, and the actual stories and characters are just bland in comparison to the factions and side quests. But Starfield is completely different. I was interested from the start, and the game forces the story on the players, which on one hand goes against what I expect in a Bethesda game, but this game as a whole is a big departure from the other ones. The start is tutorial heavy, and as I said, is rather boring. But what it does is shove the main story into your face, and it clicked with me once I got to the lodge and met the main companions. Usually, I would do the intro section like the Vault in Fallout 3, get into the world, and then forget about the story for upwards of 20 hours. But at the very least, Starfield forces you into an hour or two to get you accustomed to the game's controls and story, and it gave the main questline a sense of urgency that the other games didn't have. And since I knew what I wanted to do, I mainlined it, while also doing some main faction side quests, which I'll talk about later. The first half of it is pretty strong. It forces you to have all your companions in your party at one point so you can get a feel for who they are. If you want to be a bit morally grey, you pick Barrett, or if you want to be a goody-goody two-shoes, then go with Andreja or Sarah Morgan. You'll go to Aquila with Sam Cole to discover the roots of one of the most influential families in the city, or you'll visit Neon to help out Walter and find out just how rich and influential his company is. And on a side note, I love how weird his relationship is with his wife.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Here I am arguing with my partner, and you're just standing right here. Issa Eklund, the hyphenated Eklund in our glorious company's branding.
And it just goes on, visiting these brilliant locations. One of my favourites is the Collector's Ship, which is a short quest line where you visit a ship to get a piece of the artifact. And this ship is manned by a campy captain filled with all sorts of gadgets and knickknacks. And here you can choose the typical stealth, persuasion, or all guns blazing approach. And the story is filled with scenarios like this. But I have to talk about the story in a wider context and why I think it's the best Bethesda have ever done. So as we already established, all Bethesda games have lackluster stories, and I'm guilty of ignoring them for ages. I mean, it took me a few long playthroughs of Skyrim before I even finished the main quest line. But here in Starfield, they made an amazing storyline with some genuinely memorable quests, interesting lore, and some proper holy shit moments that had me hooked. The story was pretty decent up to a certain point, and then you get contacted by a mysterious ship and nobody has a clue what is going on. Some companions think it might be some religious apparition or something. Some think they are aliens. Others think they are interdimensional or time-traveling humans. And that's where the strength of the supporting cast shows up. Getting everyone's perspective on what they could be is fascinating, because Matteo leans into the religious side of it. Then you have the more pragmatic people like Sarah Morgan, who are all about science and not religion, and I just enjoyed hearing everybody's perspective. Later on, your two hubs get attacked by a mysterious but aptly named hunter, and you can choose which companions you want to live and which get killed, and that's where the story takes off. After that, I couldn't stop playing it. I went from mission to mission, and it only got better and better. Eventually, you find out some fascinating lore about NASA building the first grav drives and how it fecked up Earth, forcing everyone to leave, and it just keeps getting juicier and juicier as you go along. And as you start to unravel the Starborn and interdimensional travel, the story reaches a peak that no other Bethesda game has ever done, and it's perfectly shown by the quest Entangled. Here you have to investigate a distress signal in a research facility, and it seems like a normal quest until you randomly shift dimensions, the factory is ruined and overrun by alien bugs. And at first you can't control it, so you're in the middle of a conversation and then bam, you're in the other world. and one NPC also got shifted in and is stranded in the other dimension. As you explore the facility, you learn to shift through these gates so you can control it, and it becomes a mission of like a puzzle of figuring out which parts of the factories are blocked off in which dimension and cleverly shifting between them to get the piece of the artifact. And I can tell you that this is a quest that people will be talking about for ages. Whereas in the other Bethesda games, I can't single out any main quest because I had a cool moment or an interesting set piece or even a mechanic like shifting between dimensions. And throughout all these missions, you're given loads of choices that genuinely affect the outcome of the game. You can choose between which companions live or die. In this entangled mission, you're hit with a moral dilemma of saving the few versus saving the many. You can choose to stay in the dimension with the person who got trapped to help them out, or you can choose to stay in your own dimension and save the other people. And I knew what I wanted to do straight away, but I like that throughout the story you're hit with plenty of situations like this. I'm sure some of them aren't as consequential as I would think initially, but in the moment it gives the story so much more impact. On my first playthrough, I chose Sarah Morgan as my companion, and she seemed to be the most straightforward of the companions, but even someone like her had an interesting questline about her old cruise ship that wrecked on a faraway planet, and I never expected the way it was going to end. Now, from my time with this game, she was certainly the most bland of all of the main companions, so this time I chose Barrett for a bit, and then went with Andreja once she became available. I didn't get too close to Barrett, so I don't know how his quest fully plays out, but he's quite funny, he's quite entertaining to have around, and on the other hand, and more seriously, you have Andreja, who is an amazing companion. Firstly, she's class in fights, which is a big bonus, but she's part of the House Varun, which is the most mysterious part of Starfield's world. They're a religious organisation that worship the Great Serpent, and I thought it was great how they brought our faith into the relationship. I grew up in Ireland, I was raised Catholic but wouldn't consider myself Catholic anymore, and growing up around so many religious people, I could really project myself into my character having conversations with people about religion, and I found it interesting having to navigate somebody else's faith in a relationship. And yes, I know this is a game, but I like the conversations of faith versus science, or even faith versus non-belief, because they are conversations that I've had plenty of times in my life. And just very quickly, what this game does with New Game Plus is absolutely fascinating. So if I get this right, turns out Starborn are people who can travel through dimensions. And that's exactly what the New Game Plus is in this game. You're almost looping through to the start of when you met everybody at the lodge. And I love how New Game Plus actually makes sense in the world. And when you go back to the lodge, there are loads of different events you can get, or you could just have the normal event where you go back and everybody is there and you basically explain to them what's going on, so you kind of shortcut your way through most of the story. And even though I didn't experience these myself, I did Google them to see what happens. You can get these random events where you go to the lodge and things are completely different. Even though this is a full spoiler video, I don't want to talk about them too deep because I haven't experienced them myself. I've only Googled them. But if you're interested, please go have a look, because what they do is absolutely fascinating. And I love the fact that even on the normal playthrough where you go back, you can pick a different companion. And I love that dilemma you have before you loop, because I romance Andreja in my first playthrough, and before you loop, you have the conversation of like, will we remember each other? Like, what will you do when you come back? Because I could, even though myself, I have that personal relationship with Andreja, the new version of Andreja I don't have any relationship with, so I could then sort of continue that relationship or find somebody else or just completely ignore, and I love that aspect.
Your lover, Andreja, eventually chooses to be reborn herself. Your commitment to each other bolsters all relationships in the settled systems. Marriages blossom. More people in House Varun begin to question its orthodoxy and look to the outside world.
On a mechanical level, Starfield is very solid. Combat feels much better than Fallout 4, and I like the idea of the jetpack, being able to zip around the combat arena, but I never felt like I was in full control of the jetpack. And even though I'm not a vehicle person, I use them for pure utility and that's it. The ship combat and flight is probably the best I've ever seen in a game, full stop. Now, I haven't played an extensive catalogue of ship games, but in recent memory I've played Everspace 2, No Man's Sky and Starlink Battle for Atlas, and this blows all of them out of the water. The sheer amount of options you have, even at the start, is crazy. You can pull off all sorts of maneuvers, bobbing and weaving through asteroids while avoiding lasers. You can target specific parts of other ships to turn their weapons off, engines or shields. And that's not even getting into building and upgrading your ship, which is something that I didn't really engage with because I found the Mantis and kept that for the majority of my playthrough. But it's just so cool that it's there for people that like it. Now, I didn't spec into the ship skills, so I can only imagine how fun it gets later down the line, especially if you do a pirate or a bounty hunter playthrough, because you could really place yourself into that Space Captain Hook or Boba Fett role. Unfortunately though, that's where the positives end with Starfield. Everything else is either a completely neutral feature, or is so mediocre that it drags the game down too much. And while we're talking about mechanics, the lockpicking minigame was such a bad choice, so let me explain. Bethesda made lockpicking into what it is today. Loads of games just straight up copy the lockpicking from Fallout 3, and that's fine because, well, it's perfect. It makes you feel like you're actually lockpicking while also not getting in the way of the actual gameplay. The dig pick system, at first glance, is really fun. It's genuinely engaging and you have to think about it to get through the locks. But as the game goes on, and you are spending more time dig picking because the locks are getting harder, and you realise you're exploring some abandoned facility of some description, and you've spent the majority of your time dig picking, you realise just how frustrating it is, and then you just want to return to the simpler days of the old lockpicking system. In a vacuum, it's fine, but I don't know how they didn't realise how tedious it becomes after spending scores of hours with the game. The leveling up system is more like a challenge system, and I don't find it very rewarding. So in Starfield, you level up your skills by using them. So to level up your weapon skills, you have to get X amount of kills with that weapon type. Then you can use one to the next level, and these are usually stuff like, 20% increased damage with that weapon type, or, improved speech, or improved persuasion, or, something like that. And what I dislike about this system is that you will sit on skill points for too long. If I wanted to spec into a stealthy, persuasive character, I could have to sit on a few skill points until I pass X amount of speech checks, or kill enemies in stealth, or pick locks, or whatever. And then another issue arises that you really have to think ahead with your build, but not in a fun way. Near the middle of my playthrough, I wanted to upgrade my ship skills a bit because I was severely underpowered when fighting enemies in space. But then I realised I hadn't been doing the challenges to upgrade them. So then I had to spend the next while doing boring ship missions where I killed enemies in a very specific way using the targeting system, and it revealed a major flaw in the leveling system. Now this part is definitely something that you either love or hate, but I personally love it. So by the end of Bethesda games, you are usually extremely overpowered, and if I'm being honest, I like the fact that they give you that sort of power fantasy in these games. Because in other RPGs, like let's say Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age, difficulty is a part of them. You always feel at odds with the enemies, every single encounter is meaningful, and I think if I was playing Baldur's Gate or Dragon Age and I felt super powerful near the end, it would detract from the experience. But in a Bethesda game, I expect to feel like an absolute god at the end. And the thing is, with Starfield, because of the leveling up system and how few skill points you get, and also how you really have to almost plan out your build to a boring degree, and I just don't think Starfield gives you that power fantasy, because near the end, I still didn't feel overly powerful. My weapons were good, yes, but enemies could still kill me fairly easily. And yes, I had a couple of my skills upgraded, but it just didn't make me feel powerful. The worst culprit though is the emphasis on fast travelling. And here's where I have to address my goal of trying to see past the non-Bethesda-e-ness of this game. I did to a certain extent. As in, I managed to beat the main story, do the faction quests that I missed out on my first playthrough, but it doesn't mean that it didn't leave a sour taste in my mouth, because it did. So exploring in Starfield consists of this: either fast travelling directly to a planet's surface, or flying to the orbit of the planet, then landing. And it isn't without its merits, because while orbiting a random planet, you can find some great side quests. One was outside Paradiso, and it was the first human generation ship that was set to establish themselves on Paradiso. But while they were travelling in space, humans back on Earth developed a better space travel, so they reached the planet years before them, and then you have to play a diplomat between the generation ship and the humans on Paradiso, and that quest was just brilliant. Another was to do with a rogue AI ship, which somehow had me feeling guilty about an AI, and then it played a part into a unique encounter later on in the game. The problem here though is I found these quests because of other quests, while I was travelling towards. So once I was done with the faction quests, the only way I could have sought out these potentially good quests was by randomly travelling to one of the 1,000 planets in hopes that I find one. And most of the time you will get nothing other than a random ship to buy stuff from, or some pirates attacking you. And I think that is an issue that Starfield has as a whole, just an almost discoverability issue, where in Skyrim or Fallout you knew that if you went to an unexplored area of the map you would more than likely find a quest or something, whereas in Starfield you can go to an unexplored planet and find absolutely nothing. And it's the same with the surface of the many planets in Starfield. It's completely random if you'll find an interesting quest, or, more than likely, you'll find some randomly generated abandoned mining post that has some kind of okay weapon at the end. Exploration was rarely rewarded, and when it was, I was so disappointed that they couldn't have more of the interesting encounters or quests. And when it was rewarded, I was reminded of how disappointing it is that I couldn't have more of this. And let's be honest, nobody wants to fast travel to random planets only to find nothing of note. And that's why the 1,000 planets was such a bad decision from Bethesda. Imagine a world where they said there will be 50 planets, or even 100, or even 150, that's still a load of planets. But they could have done something interesting with each one. Maybe had genuine survival aspects where this planet needs a certain type of resistance or oxygen tank to get to, or maybe the planet's surface will burn you on impact, so you have to find some superpowered jetpack or a rover, or something interesting to explore it. And if they had fewer planets, they could have made it so much easier to find these brilliant quests. I'm sure I missed out on so many great quests, and I'm sad that I did, but I probably visited like 50 or 75 planets in the game, and I can't do another 950 more. And that leaves me onto the fast travel simulator that Starfield is. Now, I do want to point this out. I recently played Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2, and yeah, you are essentially fast traveling throughout the game, but they have a sense of place. I know where Denerim is in relation to Redcliffe, and that the Magi Tower is on the same lake that Redcliffe overlooks, but I don't have the same feeling with Starfield. I couldn't tell you which planet New Atlantis is on, or Killa City, or Neon, or where I did this quest. All these planets may as well be random strings of numbers to me. And I realised that once I travelled a fair bit out of the way, and I wanted to get back to the lodge on New Atlantis, and I did not have a clue what planet New Atlantis was on. And bear in mind, I had already travelled to the lodge about 50 times before, but I couldn't place where they were on the map. So I had to Google what planet New Atlantis was on, and there were so many guides and articles on where things specifically were, because I assume a lot of people had the same problem. If we take Skyrim for example, I know exactly where Riverwood is in relation to Whiterun. And I know if I want to get between them, I have to go over the mountain where you find your first dragon shout. Starfield has none of this. Even the Starborn powers are just randomly placed in random temples on random planet surfaces with nothing distinct or interesting about any of them. I noticed the fast travelling became a massive issue during the Ryujin questline. And if you don't know what it is, it's one of the main faction questlines where you are a corporate spy. You're climbing the ladder in Ryujin by infiltrating other competitors, messing with their shipments and books, and intimidating people for the good of Ryujin. How cool does that sound? And it is a great questline. But I would simply fast travel to Neon, run to Ryujin Tower, talk to whatever NPC I had to talk to get the quest, fast travel to the next place, talk to someone or sneak in somewhere, then fast travel back. It was just an exercise in fast traveling and fast traveling and fast traveling. And even though I love a lot of these quests and I love a lot of these characters, I just cannot get over the fact that I have no sense of place in Starfield. I don't know where anything is. I don't know where this planet is in relation to this planet. I don't know where this city is in relation to this city. And I need that connection to the world. Now here's the part where I discuss what I hope from the future of Bethesda. And I'm not exactly worried about Fallout 5 and Elder Scrolls 6, because I'd like to think that Starfield is just a different series. Fallout really cemented the building/survival aspect, as well as the radial questlines and infinite content in air quotes. And that side of Bethesda isn't for me. I want the deep questlines, the meaningful narrative, the endearing companions, and that's exactly what Starfield gave me. But I also want the sense of exploration that Skyrim or Fallout 4 or Fallout 3 gave me. I had to alter my expectations and play this game in a way I wasn't exactly expecting to. Their focus on loads of planets gives the game a feel that I just don't like. Some might like how it feels like an expansive space adventure, but I really dislike this approach. I'm not a developer, and I wonder if they tried this and realised it wasn't possible. But imagine a world where Starfield had fewer planets and you could get into your ship, launch straight into orbit, fly to the next planet, land and get out of it. It would have felt so much more connected, and that's what I'm missing the most. I don't feel immersed in Starfield the same way I am in Elder Scrolls and Fallout, and I don't feel connected to the world, and that's a shame, because some of the lore is fascinating and it has the best story of any Bethesda game ever. Starfield Shattered Space is out very soon, and that's the whole reason I made this video. Bethesda typically do amazing DLC drops, and in the pre-release coverage they have compared it to the likes of Far Harbor, so hopefully it'll be more contained, feel more connected, and still give me the brilliant narrative and characters that Starfield already has. If the narrative is strong and there are fewer planets and more connected locations, and I actually have reasons to explore the surface of these planets, then it might fix a lot of my issues. We'll find out very soon, so keep your eye out on that video. I seriously appreciate you taking your time to listen to me ramble. Goodbye.